Hi, I'm Victoria, your host, and welcome to Eyes on Crime. 6 years have passed since Liz Barraza was murdered in her driveway, and the fight for justice continues. Today, I'm covering the ways her loved ones are keeping her memory alive, the shifting dynamics around her case, and the questions that still won't go away. Now let's get started. Recently, Liz's family and friends gathered at Burroughs Park in Tomball, Texas, to honor her memory with something permanent. A memorial bench placed next to the tree planted for her years ago. The bench was dedicated through a collaboration between Crime Stoppers of Houston and Harris County Precinct 3 as part of the We Remember Memorial Project. This initiative aims to honor victims of violent crime, but this wasn't just about Liz. It's about creating a peaceful space for families who have lost loved ones, giving them a place to reflect and heal. The We Remember Memorial was designed to remind families that they are not alone. Liz's father, Bob Nelly, encouraged attendees to return often. Liz's parents have done everything they can to keep her memory alive, fight for justice, and help others. They've taken her case to national news, spoken at conferences, and built strong relationships with the Harris County Sheriff's Department and the homicide team. They've also connected with others who understand this tragic kind of loss, including groups like Parents of Murdered Children. I remember hearing Bob mention in an interview how much support this group has provided him. For families in their situation, having that kind of community matters. They've worked tirelessly to send a powerful message of hope, not just for Liz, but for all families seeking justice. At the memorial, Sergeant Ritchie stated that Sergio had been compliant and that investigators had no reason to believe he was involved. He stressed that the case remained active as new leads were being pursued and additional interviews conducted. Sergeant Ritchie also revealed that he was working on a grand jury subpoena. I can't help but wonder if Sergeant Ritchie's statements were strategic, perhaps to keep Sergio at ease, ensuring he would remain open to further questioning rather than lawyering up and refusing to speak at all. If by chance this is part of a broader strategy, then it's a smart move on his part. At first, I assumed Sergio had not attended the memorial event because he wasn't in any official photos. But multiple people reached out to tell me he was actually there sitting in the audience with his mom. In a short interview, Sergio explained that the shirt he wore that day was a tribute to Liz, who is an avid Harry Potter fan. In the books, 3 little stars appear on the pages, and he said that the stars on his shirt reminded him of her. His wife Amber and his father weren't there. It wasn't surprising in the case of his father. Sergio has stated in interviews that he hasn't spoken to him since the murder. His father's absence was expected given his strained relationship with Sergio. However, I don't think that was the case with Amber. Many thought it would have been nice if she had attended. She frequently shares flyers about Liz's case on Facebook, and many see that as a sign of her commitment to finding Liz's killer. But while posting online helps keep attention on the case, attending the memorial would have been a meaningful way to show support in person. Then again, she didn't have a personal relationship with Liz. Maybe she felt it wasn't her place. Either way, people took note of her absence. One thing that really stood out to me was that Sergio was not in the main photo with Liz's family, Andy Kahn, or the bench itself. In the past, he had been included in the official photos, so the fact that he wasn't this time really caught my attention. Given Sergeant Ritchie's remarks reinforcing that investigators did not consider him a suspect and were focused on new leads, it just left me to wonder, has the dynamic changed between him and Liz's family, or is something else happening behind the scenes? I received several discreetly taken photos of Sergio at the event along with a video. I was told that while a few attendees briefly spoke with him, he spent most of the event standing off to the side with his mother, unlike past events where he would have engaged more with Liz's family. Multiple attendees noted that he remained on the outskirts, separated from the core group and kind of withdrawn. Liz's memorial was meant to honor her life and keep her memory alive, but it also was a great reminder that justice has yet to be served. Her killer is still out there. Some believe Sergio is completely innocent, while others see him as a suspect, at least on some level. Honestly, I find myself wavering too. However, most of the time, I think his behavior is really odd. I admit, in interviews, he comes across as likable, soft-spoken, even gentle. Supporters argue that the public is too quick to blame the spouse and that it's not fair. But here's what I can't get past. While driving, he checked his Nest camera. He heard someone approach Liz. Even if he couldn't hear everything clearly, he definitely heard her scream and the 4 gunshots. When he got home, he saw the blood all over the driveway. He also learned his wife had been airlifted to the hospital. His neighbor had been by Liz's side, wiping excessive blood from her mouth to hear what she was trying to say. It's almost certain that Sergio was informed of this, either by the neighbor himself or by law enforcement. I have a copy of the supplemental police report filled out by investigator T.A. Turner and signed off by Supervisor L. Hernandez. In it, Turner states that as Deputy Hazel and Investigator Turner spoke with Sergio while investigating who could have hurt Liz, they noted, "During our conversation, Mr. Barraza never inquired about the condition of his wife, nor did he request approval to go to the hospital." Some might argue that he had already spoken to an officer and didn't feel the need to ask again. But if that were true, why were there no signs of his concern? In a moment of crisis, most people would ask repeatedly, pressing for updates and reassurance, yet there's no record of Sergio doing any of that. The fact that the officer specifically noted his lack of concern speaks volumes. Sergio has stated in interviews that they had a fairy tale marriage, but his actions after the shooting tell a different story. Sergio didn't arrive at the hospital until noon. Ask yourself, if your partner had just been shot 4 times at close range, would you wait hours before showing up? Why did he stay behind instead of rushing by Liz's side? He later claimed he didn't realize the seriousness of her condition and assumed she would be fine. But she wasn't fine. Liz was shot 4 times at close range. The severity should have been very obvious. So why wasn't he desperate to be with her? His actions showed no sense of urgency. He didn't rush to the hospital, he didn't act like a man in crisis, and in interviews he never acknowledges how bizarre that was. Instead, he repeats the same excuse. I'd respect him more if he'd just admit it. I made a terrible mistake. I should have gone straight to the hospital, but I didn't. I got caught up in talking with neighbors and media. I even walked the dog when I should have been with her. I have deep regret over that. But that's not what he says. Every interview follows the same script, insisting on his innocence and trying to tell everyone that he had no idea how bad things really were. And he never addresses the real question. Why was he so indifferent about getting to his wife in her final moment? Some might argue that shock can cloud judgment, that no one truly knows how they would react in a crisis. But shock doesn't cancel urgency. It doesn't override instinct. When a loved one's life is on the line, most people don't stop and think. They run, panic, and beg for answers. Sergio didn't. He didn't race to the hospital. He didn't demand updates. He didn't even ask about Liz's condition when speaking with law enforcement. His behavior wasn't that of a man visibly overcome with grief. It was the behavior of someone who, for whatever reason, didn't feel a need to be by his wife's side. At what point does shock stop being an explanation and start becoming an excuse? Sergio has stated in interviews that only a handful of people knew about the garage sale. He specifically mentioned Liz's parents, a couple of coworkers, and maybe his mom. Maybe. That seems unlikely considering how deeply involved she was in their lives and how often she was in their home. In the supplemental police report, Corporal C.W. Height noted, "I was advised by neighbors that the victim had children and possibly a mother-in-law living in the home. While the children were likely Sergio's nieces or nephews, the neighbors clearly saw them there often enough to assume they lived in the home. However, they weren't close enough to the Barraza family to know the exact relationship." As for Sergio's mom, given that she was having marital problems with his dad, it makes sense that she would want to spend a lot of time at Sergio and Liz's house. The report does have some errors, including the dates and incorrect notes stating that Liz was shot 3 times instead of 4, but that likely comes down to human error and the challenge of assessing a chaotic scene in real time. Those small mistakes don't invalidate the report as a whole. I bring this up because some people have tried to discredit the neighbor's statement that Liz had children and a mother-in-law living with her, but I believe the neighbor's statement is accurate. Not a mistake. More than likely, it reflects how frequently Sergio's mother visited and how often she brought his brother's kids along. The neighbors weren't wrong. They were just observing what they saw on a regular basis. Whenever this case is discussed, there are a lot of strong opinions on both sides. But one thing is certain, it was not random. It was a calculated hit. The person responsible didn't just stumble upon Liz that morning. They knew exactly when she'd be alone and acted within a narrow window of time. The murder happened before her parents were planned to arrive to keep her company during the garage sale, suggesting the killer had precise knowledge of her schedule. And if that wasn't suspicious enough, this also happened on one morning Sergio left for work earlier than usual. What are the odds that the killer just happened to strike when Sergio, who normally left later, was already gone? That timing is hard to ignore. Someone didn't just know about the garage sale, they knew when Liz would be alone. That kind of knowledge doesn't come from a stranger or a casual acquaintance. It comes from someone close to the victim with inside information. That's why it's strange that in multiple interviews, Sergio never lists his dad as one of the handful of people who knew about the garage sale. Why wouldn't he have known? At that time, Sergio still had a decent relationship with him and was crew chief for his father's flooring company. Are we really supposed to believe that the garage sale never came up? According to Sergio, it didn't, or he deliberately left his father off the list of people who knew, for whatever reason. Making his story even harder to believe, Sergio also suggested that his father could have been involved. But if that were true, his father would have needed to know about the garage sale. Yet in earlier interviews, Sergio never listed him among the people who knew. He can't have it both ways. Either his father knew about the sale or he didn't. But the more Sergio talks, the more he contradicts himself. Sergio was interviewed by Fox 26, and he said, "I've kept going in my life trying to think of someone who did this to her that might be close to me, that I might be friends with, that I might live with. I have no idea." This statement is interesting for a few reasons. First, it acknowledges that whoever killed Liz likely had personal ties to them. Yet he never names anyone specific, despite being the person closest to her. He also mentions someone he might have lived with, which raises further questions. Who exactly does he mean? And if he truly believed the killer was in his inner circle, wouldn't that make him more determined to figure out who it was? Instead, he presents it as something he's thought about, but ultimately shrugs off as if there's no real leads. Then there's the insurance money. Sergio says he doesn't need it. Maybe the insurance company is unwilling to pay out because he hasn't been cleared 100%, but on the case with Paula Zahn, he claimed that they lived modestly and didn't need the money. I personally don't believe that. Who wouldn't benefit from an extra $500,000? He says he doesn't need an extra $500,000, but they needed to have a garage sale for extra spending money on a trip. Let's be honest, sometimes people want out of a marriage. It's not always about the money. Some just want a way out, a clean slate, a life where they are no longer feeling tied down to their past. Barely a month after Liz's murder, he was allegedly looking online for a gym buddy, which was a bold move considering he was likely living with Liz's parents at that time. Moving on that quickly after spending a decade with Liz, 5 years together and then nearly 5 married, under such traumatic circumstances, just doesn't seem right. It raises the question, was he grieving or was he already stepping into a new chapter? Too many things just don't add up. The timeline, his actions, the overall circumstances, every piece raises more questions than answers. However, I want to make it clear that nothing I've said here is proof that Sergio committed the crime. Strange behavior doesn't equal guilt. The police say that he's been compliant, but that simply means he's doing what's asked of him. Compliance doesn't mean that he is forthcoming, and it certainly doesn't mean that he's doing everything in his power to find Liz's killer. And the fact that he hasn't been officially cleared in 6 years, that says something. This will be my final video on Liz's case unless new information comes to light. A $50,000 reward still stands for tips leading to an arrest. As Andy Kahn says, grief is intensified when justice is lacking. Liz's family deserves answers. Someone out there knows the truth. In fact, 2 people do, the shooter and the passenger in the truck. If you have any information, do the right thing. Come forward. And before I go, I just want to say thank you for watching, listening, and supporting me as I continue creating content. I'm learning and working hard to bring you well-researched cases, so please know that your support and feedback mean a lot to me. If there's another case that you would like me to cover, let me know in the comments. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing. Thank you again for watching Eyes on Crime.